Hi, Alona and Eyal. Marty Baron, thank you very much for joining us. Marty has just stepped down after 8 years as the top editor of the Washington Post, where lots of wonderful things happened in that period, including coverage of the National Security Agency that won a Pulitzer, was not the only Pulitzer. And Marty came to the Post from the Boston Globe, where he was also, for almost a dozen years, the top editor, and there famously led the paper's coverage of the Roman Catholic Church's abuse of children. If you haven't seen the movie Spotlight, you really ought to rent it as soon as this conference is over. He's played by Liev Schreiber perfectly, brilliantly. And before that, Marty was the executive editor of the Miami Herald in the late 90s. And a year or two after that, he was at the New York Times as an editor, which is where we got to know each other. I was a reporter there at the time. He's called Marty Baron, but I think it might be Martin Baron originally. I'm not sure. And so given we have an Israeli audience, I thought, Marty, I would welcome you and ask you just to tell us for a second or two about your parents and their Israeli origins, if I understand correctly. How are you?
Sure, Ethan, thanks. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. My great-grandfather, he came from Bessarabia early on. He was an early Zionist. He was part of the first Aliyah to what was then Palestine, although he was not part of the first influx of immigrants. He joined the Zionist movement about the time that Herzl wrote Der Judensat. He was 15. He was too young to go to the Zionist Congress, I guess, from what I'm told. And so he was 17, and in 1897, he immigrated to Palestine. He lived in Nes Ziona, and he was a farmer, he was a builder. He was involved in, I'm told, in making Tel Aviv, helping to make Tel Aviv a separate city from Jaffa. He built an early post office in Tel Aviv, and there's even a tiny street named after him in Petah Tikva. His daughter, who was my grandmother, was born in 1902 in Petah Tikva and lived in Nes Ziona. And then my grandfather, his family went from Poland to the United States and in 1910, and when he was 14, and then when he was 28, he emigrated to Palestine in 1922. And my mother was born in what was then Palestine, and then my father left Germany in early 1937, unfortunately, and his family immigrated to what was then Palestine. And he served in the Independence Army, and then in 1952 they moved to Paris, and 2 years later they moved to the United States.
It's a great story, actually. I mean, also the names of those towns, Nes Ziona and Petah Tikva, they're also symbolic. So I didn't realize, actually, it's a more interesting answer than I expected. So thank you for that. Marty, when you arrived at the Post, it was actually a moment of relative crisis for the paper. It was constricting its newsroom. It really wasn't sure, like most newspapers at the time, how it was going to move forward, what its business model was going to be. And in some fashion, you had an incredible piece of luck of Jeff Bezos agreeing to buy the paper and to reinvigorate it. Talk a little bit about that moment, because it really was such an important shift for that paper, and I think for American journalism. And of course, you got a lot of credit too. I don't mean it's all about money, but you know that this did make a big difference, right?
Yes, when Jeff acquired us, it made a big difference. I mean, even prior to that, we were trying to sort of make sure that we rededicated ourselves to really ambitious journalism. And, my line at the time was that the New York Times could be the U.S. Army and we would be the Special Forces. And we could still win with that. We did have, as you indicated, the story on the National Security Agency just prior to Jeff acquiring us. But when he did acquire us, obviously he made a huge difference. The first thing is that he just wanted to change our strategy. We had been a news organization that was constricting, that was becoming smaller, focusing on our region. Of course, we would cover government and politics because we were in the nation's capital. But other than that, we were going to focus on Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia, and Maryland. He came in and said that strategy may have been right in the past, It was lucrative, certainly, but that we needed to change it, and we had a great opportunity to do so because we should be national and even international. Because we were in the nation's capital. We had a name, the Washington Post, which could be leveraged to a national and even international level. And we had a history and a heritage going back to Watergate of, as he put it, shining light in dark corners. And so that really defined our identity with the American public, even though most of the American public had no access whatsoever to the Washington Post. And he said, we have this opportunity. The internet has given this gift. It's destroyed all the pillars of your industry and your business, but it has given you a gift. And of course, we wondered what that gift might be. But he said, worldwide distribution at virtually no additional cost. And so here we had this opportunity to distribute our journalism across the country and across the world. And we were well positioned to become a national and even international publication.
It's actually, again, an even more interesting answer than I expected, Marty, because I didn't realize that the whole notion of shifting from being a regional paper to being what you've become really originated with Bezos. That's very interesting. So he's shifted the way we shop, and he's shifted an important part of journalism, not just signed a check, but actually put forward a strategy, huh?
Yes, he did. And I think that's probably the most important thing that he did. Of course, the money was incredibly important. He made an investment in us. He gave us a runway. I wouldn't deny the importance of the money. But, look, we could have poured money in with the wrong strategy, and it we wouldn't have had any results that we would be proud of. And instead, you have to have a strategy, and then the money has to go toward that strategy. So the strategy is the most important.
It's true. Now, the other thing that happened, of course, in your tenure was the election of Donald Trump, which was also a fascinating injection of energy into American journalism for, good and bad reasons. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that next. So one of the reasons that I want to talk about it is, as we think about Shomrim and its role in Israeli media, one of the things is to sort of stand up for democracy and for free speech, faced a little bit by a head of state, a head of government who has challenged some of those things, certainly taken on the media in a way that's not so different from the way Donald Trump attacked American media. And I think one of the challenges for the media is to know how to respond to that and not be seen as opposing the person who runs the government, rather standing up for certain principles. So could you talk for a minute or two about how you navigated that issue? Because it was in your face. He was very, very nasty to the Washington Post, and it required an enormous amount of maturity to handle it properly.
Yeah, well, on his first full day in office, he went to the CIA, and instead of talking mostly about intelligence matters, he talked about how he said, as most of you know, I'm at war with the media. And I said after that we're not at war with the administration, we're at work. And I really meant that our work is to hold government accountable, hold all powerful individuals and institutions accountable. That's central to our purpose as a media institution. In fact, it's the very idea embedded into the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And when Madison talked about freely examining public characters and measures, that's what he was talking about, is holding government and power to account. And so, so I was very determined that we not be seen as going to war. One of his aides said at the time that we were the opposition party, and we shouldn't turn ourselves into the opposition party. Our job was to gather the facts, put them in context, and give the people, the public, the information that it needs and deserves to know to be engaged citizens. And that was our job, to be independent and to go about our business with integrity and credibility. Now, inevitably, that might put us into conflict with the government. But that is the consequence of doing our work. It's not the purpose of our work. And so that is the approach that we took. And I think that's the appropriate approach for independent journalistic institutions.
Were there times when it felt to you that others didn't understand that distinction, not just the president, but even those who were supporting your work?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we're in a time where people want to say, whose side are you on? They want you to be a partisan. They enjoy that. They may support that. And there's even I would say, a worrying temptation among people, perhaps within journalism itself, to say, look, this is a challenge to our values. This is an assault on our values of tolerance and empathy and civility and diversity and all of that. And so while we may say we're not at war, we're in war. We're in a war whether we like it or not. But I think that is a temptation and an instinct that we really have to fight against. I think we should stick to gathering up the facts, putting them in the proper context, working with independence, and giving the public the information it needs and deserves to know. And that applied during the Trump administration. It should apply during the Biden administration, and I think it is at the Washington Post. And it certainly applied during the Obama administration, where we did hold him to account. I mean, when he rolled out the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, it was completely mismanaged, and we showed that. And the administration did not like us for the work that we were doing at the time, and that's the way it goes.
Absolutely. At the same time, the sense I have here, and maybe in Israel too, is that the polarization that you allude to is also beginning to affect younger journalists. Do you feel that at all? Do you, in your dealing with younger journalists, feel that their sense of the importance of neutrality has shifted in some way compared to our generation?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't buy the idea of neutrality. It's not the one that I'm looking for. I like the idea of objectivity, and what I see as objectivity, and that's been, a lot of people would like to throw out the idea with today's trash, but I think that what objectivity means, and it's a concept that goes back 100 years, is that we go into stories with an open mind, that we're willing to listen, and we're eager to listen, and we recognize that we have a lot to learn, and that we go into stories not with all the answers, but with a lot of questions, tough questions, good questions, but that we're open-minded when we go about our stories, and we recognize that there's a severe limit to what we know, and that our own life experiences are limiting as well. They may inform us, but they also limit us. And so that's the concept that I think we need to go in with, is that we go in with the idea of being open-minded, fair, honest, honorable. But when we do all our work, when we've been rigorous about our work, when we've been thorough, then we tell people what we've learned in an unflinching way. We don't pretend that we haven't done that work, that we haven't discovered what the facts are. We don't pretend that we haven't discovered what the truth might be if we've actually found it out. We tell people what we found. And that's part of objectivity too, and it's the part that often gets lost in these conversations.
And that's why you object to the word neutrality, because it feels to you that once you've learned and figured something out, you actually have something to say, and that's not neutral? That's
exactly right. Is that I don't think it's like everything has to be 50-50. When people talk about balance, that means that regardless of the work you did, well, right, 50% will be what you discovered, and 50% will be what other people say. That's not the way I believe it should work.
I mean, when I used the word neutrality, I didn't mean that when it's all over, you had no view on it because you've learned something. I meant that you go into it without a view, as you said, with an open mind.
And I think it's important that we define our terms as we go, as we use them, because sometimes people are repudiating terms where we all have a different understanding of what it means.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Snowden and NSA story, because it was such a big deal and so risky in many ways. One of in particular, the issue that you would be afraid that you were endangering something truly important for the country. How did you go about balancing your sense of what the public needed to know and what the government said it shouldn't know?
Well, it was hugely challenging. It was a very sensitive subject, obviously. These were the most classified documents within the U.S. government.
Exactly.
And they involved matters of national security. And the national security apparatus in the United States was very much wanted us not to publish anything. That said, the government had engaged in essentially an intrusion into people's privacy without any public debate whatsoever. And I think there was and we go through this process where we ask ourselves, is there really a strong public interest argument for publishing? And we felt there was a strong public interest for argument for publishing because there had been a change in the balance between national security and personal privacy without any public debate in our democracy. And there needed to be a public debate about that. There needed to be a discussion about that. We can't just cede to the government the decision to decide that it's going to collect all sorts of information that previously we never expected that they would collect. And that if we knew they were collecting it, we would object to that. And so we can't just leave those decisions to people in the intelligence community or to politicians. I mean, in this instance, many of the politicians didn't even know about it. So representatives of the American people didn't know about it. So on that basis, we decided to publish.
And was there a debate internally about certain details that you should or shouldn't include? Were there things you kept out?
Yeah, there were details that we kept out. As in all of these cases, we always go to the intelligence agencies and tell them what we're going to publish. We are straightforward with them. We are transparent about what we know and what we intend to publish. And we always give them an opportunity to argue against anything or everything. And they often do. In fact, they almost always do. And so there were many instances where there were particular details that they didn't want published. And in a number of instances, we withheld details which would have put in danger a particular method or a particular, certainly an individual. We didn't want to put at risk anybody's life, and we avoided doing that. And I do think that there were people who were involved who were in government at the time who have told me subsequently that they felt that while they wish we had not published anything, they did feel that we went about it in a careful and serious way.
I think that's true. I certainly felt that way as a reader. I want to ask you also about the Catholic Church story in Boston. There is something sort of fascinating and amusing about the story itself, which is that you came in as a genuine outsider to the paper and to Boston, and as a Jewish American, as opposed to this very heavy Catholic city, and in many ways, the paper is pretty Catholic. I worked at the Globe before you were there, as you know. And so, one of the things that's so interesting in journalism is the role that being an outsider can give you, that it actually can be helpful because questions don't get necessarily asked by people, certain assumptions are made. And it's one of the reasons also we move foreign correspondents around after a period of time, because the conversation becomes familiar and you want an outsider to come in and say, well, really? What about? So was that played a role in addition to your, your ability to ask questions anyway, right? The fact that you came from the outside, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. I mean, the Globe had looked at cases of abuse before. There was one in 1992 involving a priest by the name of Father Porter in Fall River, Massachusetts, and they did good work on that story. They weren't able to discover as much as we did later about the cover-up of cases of clergy sex abuse over many decades and how that cover-up had taken place. But they were severely criticized by the church at the time. Cardinal Law, who was the cardinal when I was there, but it was the cardinal at the time of those first stories, he called down the power of God on the Boston Globe. It was a form of condemnation, and I think that there was a feeling that, well, we've kind of done this story and we tried and we couldn't get anywhere, and all these documents, they're under court seal, we're not going to get them. And I came in and basically said, look, why can't we get at the truth of this matter? There was a different case. It was a case of a Father Gagan who had been accused of abusing as many as 80 kids. And a columnist for the Globe, Eileen McNamara, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, a really terrific journalist. And she said in her column the day before I started work, the truth may never be known because the documents that might reveal it are under court seal and hidden from the public. And so, when you see the truth may never be known, I think that should be an incentive for journalists to find it out. And they weren't pursuing it at the time. And I asked, can't we get beyond, look, there are serious allegations of wrongdoing, that the cardinal himself knew of the abuse by this priest and he was being reassigned from parish to parish where he abused again and again. can't we get beyond the plaintiff's attorney saying that the cardinal himself knew and the archdiocese saying that these are reckless and baseless charges? And so on that basis, we decided to go to court to unseal the documents, and we embarked on a parallel investigation of our own.
It was really extraordinary work. And one of the things about the church story that also I want to engage you on is, one of the things that Shomrim is trying to do in Israel is look in corners of the society that have not traditionally been examined by journalism, because like in a lot of countries, the sort of big shot journalists in Israel are basically focused on national security and national politics.
Right.
But society has become quite wealthy and, with an extensive, all kinds of things. And so for that reason, it's trying to shine a light on some of those areas. Would you talk for a minute about the need for that?
Yeah, I think that, one of the lessons I think of the church investigation is that, and one of the questions I was often asked was, weren't you concerned about going after a powerful institution like the church? There were so many Catholics in Boston, as you pointed out. And my answer was that I'm surprised at the question, because the more powerful the institution, the greater the obligation we have to investigate it, because it can do more damage. And because it has a greater capacity to suppress the truth. And the corollary is also true, and that is that the less powerful the victims of abuse, the greater the obligation the greater the urgency we have to give them a voice. And so undoubtedly in Israeli society, as well as in the society of all countries, including the United States, there are many individuals without any power whose voices are not being heard and who need to be listened to. And I think one of the special obligations that we have as journalists is to make sure that we are listening to those voices, to those individuals, and giving them a voice.
That's fantastic. Marty, it's really an honor for Shomrim for you to highlight the conference today. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much for your example. I think that for me, you just do your damn work so damn well, and that's all that really matters. So all the best to you, and thank you.
Thank you, Ethan, and good luck to Shomrim.